The Spanish moss hung like tattered shrouds from the ancient oak trees, swaying in the humid Louisiana breeze as I pulled my rental car up the gravel driveway. The Myrtles plantation loomed before me, its white columns and wraparound veranda looking deceptively peaceful in the fading daylight. I'm Jacob Morrison, a paranormal investigator with 15 years of experience, and I thought I'd seen everything. I was wrong. The plantation's reputation preceded it, America's most haunted house, they called it. Built in 1796, the antebellum mansion had witnessed more than its share of tragedy. Murders, poisonings, yellow fever epidemics, and Civil War horrors had all left their mark on this place. But reputation and reality are two different things, and I'd debunked more haunted locations than I'd validated. As I stepped out of the car, the oppressive weight of the Louisiana humidity hit me like a physical force. But there was something else, a heaviness in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. The silence was wrong. No birds sang in the massive oaks, no insects buzzed in the undergrowth. Even the wind seemed to whisper warnings as it rustled through the Spanish moss. The plantation's manager, Mrs. Bordelon, greeted me at the front door. She was a thin woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that seemed to have seen too much. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice carrying the melodic cadence of a true Louisiana native. "I must say, I'm surprised you came alone. Most investigators bring teams." "I work better alone," I replied, shouldering my equipment bag. "Less contamination of evidence." She nodded, but I caught the flicker of concern in her eyes. "Well, you'll be staying in the William Winter room tonight." "It's where?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Where Mr. Winter met his unfortunate end." I knew the story. William Winter, a lawyer who had rented the room, was shot on the front porch in 1871. He'd managed to stagger up the stairs to his room, where he died on the 17th step. Guests had reported seeing his spirit climbing those same stairs ever since. "That's perfect," I said. "The more active the location, the better." Mrs. Bordelon led me through the house, pointing out various rooms and their associated hauntings. The dining room where Chloe, the slave girl, had allegedly poisoned the family with oleander. The mirror that supposedly trapped the spirits of Sarah Woodruff and her children. The music room where invisible hands played the piano at night. As we walked, I noticed how the floorboards creaked in a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate, like footsteps following just behind us. Every shadow appeared to shift at the edge of my vision, and twice I turned around, certain someone was there. But the hallways remained empty? "The house has been particularly active lately," Mrs. Bordelon said as we climbed the main staircase. "We've had several guests check out in the middle of the night. One woman claimed something grabbed her ankle while she slept." We reached the William Winter room, and she handed me the key, an old-fashioned skeleton key that felt ice-cold despite the warm evening air. "Dinner is at 7 if you'd like to join the other guests," she said. "But I should mention, most people prefer to eat early and retire to their rooms before full dark." "Why's that?" Her expression grew grave. "The spirits here are restless after sunset. And they don't much care for strangers." After she left, I set up my equipment methodically. EMF meters, digital thermometers, full-spectrum cameras, and audio recorders were positioned throughout the room. The William Winter room was spacious, with a four-poster bed, antique furniture, and windows that looked out over the plantation grounds. Everything appeared normal, but there was an underlying wrongness I couldn't shake. As I worked, the temperature in the room seemed to fluctuate randomly. One moment I'd be sweating in the humid air, the next I'd feel a chill that raised goosebumps on my arms. My EMF detector began giving sporadic readings, the needle jumping from 0 to dangerous levels and back again. I decided to skip dinner and begin my investigation immediately. Something about this place demanded respect, and I had the distinct feeling I was being watched, evaluated, judged. The sun set with alarming speed, plunging the plantation into an oppressive darkness that seemed to press against the windows like a living thing. I turned on my recording equipment and began my standard routine. "This is Jacob Morrison, beginning investigation of the Myrtles Plantation, Louisiana. The time is 8:47 p.m., temperature is 78 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm starting in the William Winter room, site of the 1871 death of attorney William Winter." The moment I spoke his name, every piece of electronic equipment in the room went haywire. The EMF meter's needle slammed to maximum, my digital thermometer began flashing error codes, and the audio recorder emitted a high-pitched squeal that made my teeth ache. Then, silence. In that silence, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps approaching my door. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. The footsteps stopped directly outside. I waited, barely breathing, for what felt like an eternity. Then, so softly I almost missed it, came the sound of the doorknob turning. I yanked the door open, flashlight raised, but the hallway was empty. Empty, but not quiet. From somewhere deeper in the house came the sound of a piano playing, a melancholy tune that seemed to echo from another century. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I made my way through the darkened hallways, guided only by my flashlight and the haunting melody that seemed to drift from room to room like smoke. The floorboards groaned under my feet, and more than once I heard what sounded like whispered conversations coming from empty rooms. The music led me to the parlor, where an antique piano sat in the corner. As I approached, the music stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like being underwater. I shone my light on the piano keys, half expecting to see invisible fingers dancing across them. That's when I saw her. In the reflection of the piano's polished surface, barely visible in the beam of my flashlight, was the figure of a young woman in a white dress. She appeared to be standing directly behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the piano, the reflection was gone. But something else had taken its place, muddy footprints on the floor that hadn't been there moments before. Small footprints, like those of a child, leading from the piano to the staircase. I followed them, my flashlight beam dancing across walls lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to track my movement. The footprints led up the main staircase, and with each step I climbed, the air grew colder. By the time I reached the second floor, my breath was visible in small puffs of vapor. The footprints continued down the hallway toward my room, but as I followed them, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were now two sets of prints, the small ones I'd been following, and larger ones that seemed to be stalking them. As I reached my door, I heard voices coming from inside my room. Muffled, urgent voices speaking in what sounded like a heated argument. I pressed my ear to the door and heard a man's voice, angry and demanding, followed by a woman's voice, pleading and desperate. I inserted the skeleton key with trembling hands and slowly opened the door. The voices stopped immediately, but the room was not as I had left it. My equipment had been moved, carefully rearranged in a perfect circle around the bed. And in the center of that circle, written in what looked like condensation on the hardwood floor, was a single word. Leave. I should have listened to that warning. God help me, I should have packed up my equipment and driven straight back to the airport. But 15 years of paranormal investigation had made me stubborn, perhaps even reckless. I'd never encountered anything I couldn't explain or face down, and my pride wouldn't let me run from what might be the most significant paranormal experience of my career. I reset my equipment and prepared to spend the night in the William Winter room. That was my first mistake. As midnight approached, the temperature in the room began to drop steadily. I watched my digital thermometer display numbers that should have been impossible in Louisiana's humid climate, 65 degrees, then 55, then 45. Ice began forming on the windows, and my breath created clouds in the frigid air. At exactly 12 a.m., the footsteps began. They started at the far end of the hallway, slow and measured, like someone carrying a great weight. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. Each footfall seemed to echo through the entire house, growing louder as they approached my room. I positioned myself by the door, recording equipment ready. The footsteps drew closer, and I could swear I heard labored breathing accompanying them, as if someone was struggling with each step. The footsteps stopped directly outside my door. I waited, every muscle tensed, for something to happen. Seconds stretched into minutes, and still the presence remained just beyond the door. Then, slowly, deliberately, something began to scratch at the wood. Long, drawn-out scratches that sounded like fingernails dragging across the surface. The scratching continued for several minutes before stopping abruptly. In the silence that followed, I heard something that made my stomach lurch, the sound of liquid dripping onto the floor on the other side of the door. Drip. 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 I knew what it was before I opened the door, but the sight still made me stagger backward. A pool of dark liquid, blood, was spreading across the hallway floor just outside my room. And there, pressed against my door at about chest height, was a bloody handprint. But it was what I saw at the end of the hallway that nearly sent me into panic. A figure stood in the shadows, barely visible in the dim light from my room. It was tall, wearing what appeared to be a dark suit, and it stood with an unnatural stillness that no living person could maintain. As I watched, the figure began to move toward me with that same labored gait I'd heard in the footsteps. With each step, more blood appeared on the floor, and I could see now that the figure was clutching its chest, dark liquid seeping between its fingers. This was William Winter, shot on the porch below, struggling to reach his room, my room, where he would finally succumb to his wounds. I slammed the door and turned the key, but I knew it wouldn't matter. This spirit had been making this journey for over 150 years, and a locked door wouldn't stop him now. The footsteps reached my door and stopped. The doorknob began to turn slowly, despite the fact that I had locked it moments before. The door creaked open, and the temperature in the room plummeted even further. William Winter stood in my doorway. He was exactly as I had imagined him, tall, gaunt, wearing a dark suit that was torn and bloodstained. His face was pale as moonlight, his eyes dark hollows that seemed to look right through me. Blood flowed freely from a wound in his chest, staining the floor around his feet. He raised one trembling hand and pointed directly at me. "You," he said, his voice like wind through a graveyard. "You don't belong here." I tried to speak, to explain that I was just investigating, but no words would come. The spirit of William Winter began to walk toward me, leaving bloody footprints with each step. As he drew closer, I could smell the metallic scent of blood and something else, the sickly sweet odor of decay. "This is my room," he continued, his hollow voice filling the space around us. "I died here. I suffered here. And you are not welcome." He reached out toward me with one blood-soaked hand, and I felt a cold that went beyond physical sensation, a cold that seemed to freeze my very soul. Just as his fingers were about to touch my face, he suddenly stopped, his head turning toward the window as if he heard something I could not. "She comes," he whispered, and for the first time, I heard fear in his ghostly voice. "She comes for you now." William Winter's spirit began to fade, becoming translucent and then disappearing entirely, but his blood remained on my floor, and his warning echoed in my mind. The silence that followed was somehow worse than his presence had been. I stood alone in the freezing room, surrounded by the evidence of a supernatural encounter that defied everything I thought I knew about the paranormal. My equipment had recorded it all, but I barely cared about the evidence anymore. Something had fundamentally changed about my situation at the Myrtles plantation. I was no longer the hunter. I had become the hunted. A new sound began to drift through the house, the soft, melodic humming of a woman's voice. It was coming from somewhere below, in the main part of the house, but it seemed to carry through the walls themselves. The tune was old, mournful, and somehow familiar, though I couldn't place it. As the humming continued, I heard other sounds joining it, the rustle of a long dress across hardwood floors, the soft pad of bare feet on stairs, and underneath it all, a low whispering that might have been wind through the trees or might have been voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. My EMF detector, which had been silent since William Winter's departure, suddenly sprang to life again. But this time, instead of the sharp, erratic readings I'd gotten before, the needle moved in slow, rhythmic waves, as if it were detecting something that pulsed with a steady, heartbeat-like rhythm. The humming grew louder, and I realized it was moving through the house, coming closer to my room. I pressed my ear to the floor and could hear footsteps directly below me, pacing back and forth in what I thought must be the main parlor. Then the footsteps began to climb the stairs. I knew, with a certainty that came from some primitive part of my brain, that whatever was coming up those stairs was far more dangerous than William Winter's spirit had been. His presence had been melancholy, almost sad, the ghost of a man who had died tragically but peacefully. This new presence felt different. It felt angry. It felt hungry. The footsteps reached the second floor and began moving down the hallway toward my room. But unlike Winter's labored gait, these steps were light, almost dancing. The humming continued, growing louder with each step, and now I could make out words in the melody, words in what sounded like French Creole. The footsteps stopped outside my door, and the humming ceased abruptly. In the silence that followed, I heard something that made every hair on my body stand on end, the sound of a child giggling. It was a sweet, innocent sound that would have been delightful under any other circumstances. But here, in this haunted house, in the dead of night, after everything I had already experienced, that childish laughter was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. The giggling continued for several minutes, sometimes moving from one side of my door to the other, as if a child were playing in the hallway outside. Occasionally, I would hear small hands patting against the door, or the sound of something being dragged across the floor. Then came the knocking. It started softly, 3 gentle raps on my door, like a polite child asking for permission to enter. When I didn't respond, the knocking came again, slightly louder. Then again, more insistent. "Monsieur?" came a small voice from the other side of the door. It was the voice of a young girl, speaking with the lilting accent of old Louisiana. "Monsieur, are you awake?" I remained silent, hoping that if I didn't respond, whatever was out there would go away. But the voice came again, more insistent now. "I know you're in there, monsieur. I can hear your heart beating. It sounds like a drum in the night." The doorknob began to rattle, and I heard small fingers scratching at the wood around the lock. "Please, monsieur, I just want to come in. I want to show you something. Something beautiful." The scratching continued, and I realized with growing horror that the sound was coming from inside the wood itself, as if invisible fingers were clawing their way through the door from the inside out. "I used to live here, monsieur. A long, long time ago. Before the sickness came. Before the master got angry. Before." The voice trailed off, and the scratching stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard what sounded like crying, the heartbroken sobs of a small child. Despite every instinct telling me to stay away from the door, I found myself drawn to it. There was something about that crying that broke through my fear and touched something deeper, a human instinct to comfort a child in distress. I pressed my ear to the door and whispered, "Are you okay?" The crying stopped immediately. "Oh, yes, monsieur," came the delighted reply. "I'm much better now. Will you open the door? I have something to show you. Something the master gave me. Something special." Every rational part of my mind screamed warnings, but I found my hand reaching for the door handle anyway. There was something compelling about that voice, something that made it almost impossible to refuse. "What do you want to show me?" I asked. "The pretty flowers, monsieur. The ones that smell so sweet. The master picked them just for me. He said they would make everything better." My blood ran cold. I knew what she was talking about. Oleander flowers, the same flowers that Chloe, the slave girl, had supposedly used to poison the Woodruff family. According to legend, she had ground them up and put them in a birthday cake, killing Sarah Woodruff and her 2 daughters. "I don't think I want to see the flowers," I said, backing away from the door. The response was immediate and terrifying. The gentle knocking became violent pounding, and the sweet child's voice became a shriek of rage. "You will look at my flowers. You will eat my cake. You will die like the others." The door began to shake on its hinges, and I could hear wood beginning to splinter. Whatever was on the other side was no longer pretending to be a harmless child. I grabbed my flashlight and backed toward the window, looking for an escape route. The pounding continued, growing more violent with each impact. Cracks appeared in the door, spreading like spider webs across the aged wood. Then, suddenly, the pounding stopped. The silence was complete and absolute, more frightening than the violent assault had been. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, flashlight raised, waiting for whatever would come next. What came next was worse than anything I could have imagined. The door didn't break down. Instead, it simply dissolved, melting away like morning mist until there was nothing but an empty doorway. And in that doorway stood a little girl. She appeared to be no more than 8 or 9 years old, with dark skin and hair braided with colorful ribbons. She wore a simple white dress that would have been appropriate for a slave child in the 1800s. At first glance, she looked perfectly normal, even beautiful. But when I looked closer, I saw the truth. Her eyes were solid black, like pools of tar, and her smile revealed teeth that were far too sharp for any human child. In her small hands, she held a wicker basket filled with pink oleander flowers, their sweet fragrance filling the room with a cloying, suffocating scent. "Hello, monsieur," she said, her voice now carrying an echo that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I am Chloe. Would you like some cake?" She stepped into the room, and with each step, the flowers in her basket seemed to multiply. The sweet smell grew stronger, and I began to feel dizzy, nauseous. I knew that oleander was poisonous even to breathe in large quantities, and the supernatural concentration filling my room was far beyond anything natural. "I made it special," Chloe continued, walking slowly toward me. "Just like I made it for Miss Sarah and her pretty daughters. They loved it so much, they ate every bite." I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't respond properly. The oleander's poison was already affecting me, making my movements sluggish and uncoordinated. "Don't be afraid, monsieur. It doesn't hurt much. Just a little burning in your throat, a little pain in your belly. Then you sleep forever, and you stay here with us. Wouldn't you like that? Wouldn't you like to stay here forever?" She was close enough now that I could see the details of her impossible face. Her skin had a waxy, artificial quality, like a doll that had been painted to look alive. Her black eyes reflected no light at all, and when she smiled, I could see that her mouth extended far too wide, stretching almost to her ears. "I've been so lonely, monsieur. Mr. Winter, he doesn't like to play. He just walks and bleeds and bleeds. But you seem like you might be fun." She reached into her basket and pulled out a small piece of cake. It looked delicious, white frosting decorated with pink oleander petals, but I could smell the poison radiating from it like heat from a fire. "Just one bite," she whispered, holding the cake up toward my face. "Just one little bite, and all your troubles will be over." The cake was inches from my mouth when something inside me snapped. 15 years of paranormal investigation had taught me many things, but the most important was this: no matter how real a supernatural entity might seem, it was still bound by certain rules. And one of those rules was that it couldn't force you to do anything, it could only convince you to do it yourself. "No," I said, pushing the cake away from my face. "I won't eat it." Chloe's expression changed instantly. The false sweetness vanished, replaced by a rage so pure and intense it was like looking into the face of a demon. "You will eat it?" she screamed, her voice no longer sounding human at all. "You will die like the others. You will stay here with me." She lunged at me with inhuman speed, trying to force the poison cake into my mouth. But the moment I had said no, the moment I had refused her offering, her power over me had broken. I was able to dodge her attack and run for the door. I burst out of the room and ran down the hallway, my feet pounding on the hardwood floors. Behind me, I could hear Chloe's enraged shrieks echoing through the house, growing louder and more inhuman with each second. I reached the main staircase and began to descend, taking the steps 3 at a time. But as I ran, I noticed something that made my heart sink: the house was changing around me. The wallpaper was fading and peeling, revealing older patterns underneath. The furniture was shifting, becoming more antique, more decrepit. The very air was growing thicker, harder to breathe. I was being pulled back in time, into the plantation's dark past. By the time I reached the main floor, the house looked exactly as it must have in the 1800s. Candles provided the only light, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The smell of wood smoke and something else, something rotten, filled the air. I could hear voices coming from the dining room, the sound of a family having dinner. Against my better judgment, I crept toward the doorway and peered inside. The scene that greeted me was like something from a nightmare. A family sat around the dining table, a man, a woman, and 2 young daughters. They were dressed in the fashion of the 1800s, and they were eating cake. Pink cake decorated with oleander flowers. But they were dead. Their skin was gray and waxy, their eyes clouded and lifeless. Dark liquid dripped from their mouths as they mechanically chewed and swallowed. And standing beside the table, watching them with obvious satisfaction, was Chloe. She turned to look at me, and her terrible smile grew even wider. "See, monsieur? See how happy they are? They've been eating my cake for more than 150 years, and they love it so much. Won't you join them?" The dead family turned to look at me as well, their clouded eyes pleading. The man tried to speak, but only a gurgling sound came out, along with more of the dark liquid. "They want you to stay," Chloe said. "They want you to be part of our family. Forever and ever and ever." I turned to run, but found my way blocked by another figure, a tall, thin man in a white suit. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes hollow with hunger. This had to be Judge Clark Woodruff, the master of the plantation, the man who had ordered Chloe's punishment for eavesdropping. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "The evening's entertainment has just begun." Behind him, I could see more figures emerging from the shadows, slaves and masters, victims and victimizers, all the restless dead who had never left the Myrtles plantation. They formed a circle around me, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. "Welcome to our family," Judge Woodruff said. "You'll find eternity passes quite quickly here. The first 100 years are the hardest." They began to close in on me, their dead hands reaching out to grab me, to pull me into their eternal nightmare. I could smell the decay on them, could see the wounds that had killed them still fresh and bleeding. I was trapped, surrounded by the vengeful dead with no hope of escape. That's when I heard it, the sound of breaking glass from somewhere upstairs. The spirits paused, their attention drawn to the sound. In that moment of distraction, I saw my chance. I broke through their circle and ran toward the front door, praying it would still be unlocked. The door handle turned, and I burst out onto the front porch, gasping the cool night air like a drowning man. But I wasn't safe yet. Behind me, I could hear the dead following, their footsteps thundering across the floors of the house. I ran to my car, fumbling for the keys with shaking hands. The engine turned over on the third try, and I gunned it down the gravel driveway, not caring about the noise or the damage to the rental. In my rearview mirror, I could see them standing on the porch, dozens of figures in period dress, watching me flee. And in the center of them all, still holding her basket of poisonous flowers, stood Chloe. Even from that distance, I could see her smile. I drove through the night, not stopping until I reached the airport in Baton Rouge. I caught the first flight out, leaving behind all my equipment and most of my clothes. I told myself I would return for them later, but I knew I never would. That was 3 months ago. I've tried to go back to my normal life, to continue my work as a paranormal investigator, but everything has changed. The other hauntings seem tame now, almost silly. How do you investigate a cold spot in someone's basement when you've stood face to face with the malevolent dead? But the worst part is the dreams. Every night, I dream of the Myrtles plantation. I dream of Chloe and her poisoned flowers, of William Winter bleeding on the stairs, of the dead family eating their eternal meal. And in every dream, I hear the same message. "Come back to us, Jacob. Come home." I've tried sleeping pills, therapy, even meditation, but nothing stops the dreams. And lately, they've been getting more vivid, more real. Sometimes I wake up with the smell of oleander flowers in my nostrils, or with the taste of something sweet and poisonous in my mouth. Yesterday, I found a pink flower petal on my pillow. I know what this means. I know what's happening to me. The spirits of the Myrtles plantation have marked me, claimed me as their own. Distance means nothing to them. I could fly to the other side of the world, and they would still find me. So I'm writing this account as a warning to others who might be tempted to visit that cursed place. The Myrtles plantation is not just haunted, it's a trap, a supernatural prison designed to collect souls for its eternal residents. If you're reading this, if you're thinking about spending a night at America's most haunted house, please reconsider. Find somewhere else to test your courage, somewhere else to seek your thrills. Because once the spirits of the Myrtles know your name, once they've marked you as their own, there's no escape. The dreams are getting stronger every night, and I know it's only a matter of time before I stop waking up from them. When that happens, if you ever find yourself at the Myrtles plantation, you might see me there, standing with the others on the front porch, waiting for the next visitor to arrive. Waiting to welcome them home. Forever. Jacob Morrison's journal was found in his apartment after he disappeared from his home in Chicago. His rental car was discovered 3 days later in the parking lot of the Myrtles plantation. He was never seen again, though guests at the plantation have reported seeing a man matching his description standing with the other spirits on the front porch, beckoning visitors to come closer. His room at the plantation, the William Winter room, is now permanently closed to guests. But late at night, People still report hearing voices coming from behind its locked door, voices that sound like they're having a heated argument about whether or not someone should come inside. Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like and subscribe button, and then share it with your friends. Your support helps us grow and create even more awesome content. We appreciate you being part of the journey.